Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Wednesday. This is Seattle Now. Seattle will soon have one less newsroom. Cascade PBS announced this week they're getting out of the business of local long-form journalism. We'll talk about what that means for local news consumers in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. It's budget season for local governments, and this morning the Seattle City Council takes their first crack at developing the 2026 budget. Mayor Harrell's version includes a sales tax increase to raise nearly $40 million to spend on public safety, including drug treatment. The mayor is also counting on a revamp of the city's B&O tax that could bring an additional $80 million. Today's presentation begins at 9:30. And hey, speaking of budgets, the median income of a married couple with kids in Seattle has now shot past $250,000. The Seattle Times analyzed new census data and found that Seattle is one of only 3 cities with income levels this high. Our peer cities are San Francisco and Washington, D.C., no surprise there. By the way, the median income for all households in Seattle last year was $118,000. And hey, now that the Mariners have clinched a postseason berth, tickets go on sale this morning. If you're signed up for Mariners emails and text messages, your tickets go on sale beginning at 10 a.m. Public ticket sales begin at noon. Fans, you can buy up to 4 tickets per transaction. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Cascade Public Media laid off its newsroom staff this week. They blamed the move on recent cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The federal government created the CPB way back when Lyndon Johnson was president. It was an innovative plan to address a critical need that wasn't being filled by the private sector.
The free market was not going to create educational programming, children's programming, even proper investigative reporting because there was no money in it.
That's Hansen Hossein. He's the president of HRH Media Group, a storytelling, consulting, and documentary filmmaking company. He also served one term on KUOW's board starting in 2016.
And so there was the market failure that they said, we're going to create this. But it's been a threat to the establishment ever since. And now we're facing a different kind of market failure with regards to television and print because of there being old media, as well as misinformation and disinformation. And so we actually need this more than ever, but we need to make the case for it.
The reality is, in a flashy world of true crime, it's getting harder for investigative journalism to break through the noise. It's important, but it's not always sexy.
And so if you look at the kind of reporting that has been done by Cascade PBS with regards to workers' compensation or whatever else, there has been follow-through that change actually benefits people positively.
By next year, the CPB will no longer exist, leaving public media organizations like Cascade PBS and even KUOW to figure out a future without federal funding. But it won't solve the larger problem of trust.
And so I know that a trend that's happened over the last few years for journalists to even survive this current situation is to be as transparent as possible about who they are, what they believe in, and what they do. And I think that transparency actually does work. When I used to cover the Middle East as a journalist, which is one of the most explosive subjects you can cover. And people would always attack me or send me emails calling into question X, Y, and Z, but I would always respond. And whenever I responded, it brought the fever pitch down because they recognized there was a human there and that they were trying to think it through too, and I wasn't totally bought into one thing.
Publicola co-founder and publisher Erica Barnett is well aware of what it's like to run an independent media organization. One option she mentioned that's been floated to help fund robust local media is a kind of voucher system,
where there would be a small tax increase that would pay for local journalism, and people would be able to choose which outlets they wanted to support with their tax dollars the same way they do with people who run for political office.
Eric has been reporting on the layoffs at Cascade PBS and is here now to help us understand what they mean for our local media landscape. Good to see you, Erica. Thanks for coming in.
Good to see you, too.
So let's start with what we know. What are the details we have from Cascade PBS about the extent and reasoning behind this week's layoffs?
Well, Cascade PBS is saying that this is the response to federal cuts. The elimination of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has resulted in them needing to cut their budget by, they said, about $3.5 million. That's about 10% of their budget. And they have said that that is the reason for these cuts. Now, these cuts are very directional. As you said, they're eliminating their newsrooms. So so the choice here was to get rid of local news, essentially. And they said focus on some of their products that are very popular, which are video shows about more lifestyle-oriented Northwest stories. So while they are saying that this is because of need for budget cuts, it is also a very specific programming choice to no longer cover local news in the way that they had.
Yeah, and I want to follow up and ask what kind of message these kinds of cuts send.
Yeah, I mean, to the public and to people who were readers of their what they are calling long form coverage, but really what they mean is all print written coverage. It means the end of a website called Crosscut that was started in 2007 and eventually merged into Cascade PBS. So, I mean, I think the message it sends is that local news is not a priority for Cascade PBS. And I mean, perhaps that sounds harsh, but when you eliminate 19 jobs in one fell swoop, and they are all the same type of job covering various aspects of local and regional and statewide news, that is the message that it sends, that this is not a priority for this station and this nonprofit.
What does Seattle lose in this equation, Erica, with the shuttering of the entire newsroom? You say it's a loss of priority, but there's a bigger ecosystem here.
Yeah, I mean, local news across the country, including in Seattle, has been shrinking, as I'm sure your listeners know, for many years. KUOW has also had layoffs. And so when you cut these jobs, I mean, they don't come back. And so there's a lot of implications for that. I mean, the jobs that were eliminated include a fellow position, which is sort of an emerging journalist position. They've had interns in the past. A lot of that provides the pipeline for publications to actually, have seasoned reporters, have reporters who work the beat, who know their local communities better than anybody. And so not only is it getting rid of those reporters themselves, or at least these jobs for those reporters, so there's going to be, vast amounts of coverage that's not going to happen anymore, that people are going to be less informed on. But you also lose part of that pipeline, which is a real problem. I mean, as somebody who hires freelancers myself and has had employees myself as a very small publication at Publicola, it is hard to find people. And the reason it's hard to find people is not because people are not good at journalism and not interested in journalism and not going to school for journalism. It is because there isn't that pipeline that produces these paid internships and these opportunities for young writers that are emerging.
Erica, in their announcement, Cascade PBS used the term long form, but let's talk a little bit about the work that the journalists were doing over there.
My familiarity is primarily with local coverage because Josh Cohen, who once actually wrote for Publicola, he's their City Hall reporter, and I would see him, everywhere. He is one of those ever-present faces at City Hall. But they also did long-form coverage of Indigenous affairs, environmental coverage. I mean, when we're talking about stories that don't get covered very much, that was very much Crosscut's niche. And that was long-form coverage. It was investigative stories that took a really long time to report out. And so you wouldn't have that kind of daily, drumbeat of here's a story from this person every single day. And that kind of stuff is really endangered. Investigative long-form stories are incredibly endangered. The Seattle Times has an investigative team, but I would say, I think all reporting should be investigative, but those long-form stories are hard to justify if you're just looking at a balance sheet and you're just looking at productivity. And I think that we unfortunately have moved a long distance in that direction, ever since really the rise of blogs. And so that kind of coverage is, it's hard to justify financially, but it's really important.
Yeah. How does Publicola do it? How do you stay in business, Erica?
Well, I'm very, very small. I was talking about that pipeline, and we are essentially a one-person publication with freelancers, and so I have a freelance budget. But my income, we've tried lots of different revenue models over the years. There's letting rich people sort of come in and give us money, but also kind of dictate coverage a little bit, or not coverage, but coverage areas to some extent. That didn't work. Ads obviously didn't work and aren't working now for a lot of publications. So now I rely entirely on reader donations. And that does work, but it also perhaps is not the model for everybody because, you're talking about almost, what has become the one-person Substack model. And that, I think, is unsustainable on a very large scale for replacing, say, 16 journalists, because it's just people can't give, $10 a month to 100 different journalists or 50 journalists. It just becomes very expensive.
Right. You're an important but specific part of the ecosystem here. This model is not sustainable for a local news ecosystem at large. In this climate of government funding and Congress ripping back funding for public media, where is the role of government in media? Why should they play a role in local media?
Well, I think that government has an interest in democracy, and local media and local news coverage is sort of the root level of democracy. I mean, I am a local reporter by choice, have been for 25 plus years now, because I think that local news is so incredibly important, and because it's the place where people can actually impact their, what their government does. You hear about something or you read about something on KUOW or Publicola, you go to your public hearing, you talk to your council member. And so I think opposing that kind of thing, I mean, it is a statement that, you don't support, public funding for the people that keep politicians honest. And that is the primary role, I think, of local news reporting is to hold people accountable.
All right. Before I let you go, we have one less newsroom in the city. What are the stakes for local news in Seattle right now?
As I said, local news reporting, I think, is, the most fundamental form of reporting and one of the most important. And so when you have less of it, which we have seen, increasingly over the years, I mean, there are stories that just simply will not get covered that you'll never know are happening. Local government will be less accountable. I mean, as well as state government. I'm counting that in local government. And the people that, that run things, politicians, budget writers, people in power, will be able to do things with less transparency. And I'm not saying that we should go around being suspicious of government in that way or paranoid, but the fact is that, I mean, there are every week a dozen stories that get pitched to me that I can't cover as one person. And it breaks my heart because I wish I could. I wish I had, a big newsroom that I could assign stories to. And when you lose an entire newsroom, that is, 16, of me going away. And so there's just going to be less knowledge and less understanding of how our local and state and county and regional governments work.
Yeah, I can certainly attest that life as a reporter feels like an unfillable bucket at some point. There is never enough time to cover the stuff you think is important. Erica C. Barnett, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Erica Barnett is the co-founder and publisher of Publicola. Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now, and thank you for supporting us financially. Hello to our newest donors, Maya, Johnsuki, and Jonica. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, who got her journalism start as a crosscut emerging journalist fellow. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.